Now I can't. First of all, I can't imagine I'd ever do a movie that had a gun in it again. And I can't.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Alec Baldwin's sincerity. It's being questioned of late. It is something that does come up quite often in true crime. Somebody makes a statement, somebody does certain things, and it seems to be sincere. It is meant to appear sincere, and then other behaviors and other actions take place. And then the question is, how sincere was it? How sincere is it? And then in effect, how sincere is this person? How sincere is this human being? And so we heard in the final minute of Baldwin's interview with ABC, he said, I can't imagine I'd ever do a movie that had a gun in it again. I can't. And also according to ABC News, he said, I couldn't give a SHIT about my career anymore. And then Stephanopoulos asked him, is it over? And he said, well, it could be. Well, obviously it isn't. So although Helena Hutchins' death seemed to make him question whether he wants to continue making films, certainly in that interview, and he said he couldn't imagine doing a movie with guns in it. Well, he's kind of gotten off to a pretty quick start. All of this happened in October, late October, and the investigation hasn't even been concluded, and Baldwin has jetted off to participate in another film. So think about it, barely 2 months after making that statement, Baldwin is back at work, working on a movie called 97 Minutes about a hijacked plane. Oh, so they're not hijacking the plane with a gun or with any kind of weapons. Before we get to today's episode, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So, unsurprisingly, some crisis PR experts like Dave Quast are questioning Baldwin's sincerity, but quite a few people are doing that anyway. And they've sort of been wondering all along, what is actually going on? Does he really feel this way? Does he really mean this, or does he mean that? And one way to examine someone's sincerity or the way that they present themselves is to look at their social media. Do they seem sincere in their social media? What is their social media about? So Fox News went and spoke to a couple of crisis PR experts and brand sort of image consultants and got their view on what Baldwin is doing and whether it is something that they would advise. And so the first one, Dave Quast, said the following to Fox News, quote, some might question his sincerity when he so quickly goes abroad to shoot a disaster movie on the heels of a real-life disaster. If Baldwin is going to keep making movies, then he may want to hold off for a more feel-good film that would showcase a softer side, end quote. I don't think it's only about that. I don't think it's only the short period of time between the one film and the other. I think it's also that whenever he goes to make a film, he's leaving 6 very small children behind, right? Anyway, that's another aspect to it. Another expert, this one in branding, was more on the chin in his assessment, telling Fox News that he felt that Baldwin was being boneheaded in what he was doing. This guy's name's Eric Schiffer, and he described Baldwin's quote-unquote bounce to film a movie in England while the investigation was still underway was likely to put pressure on prosecutors. In other words, that pressure that because Baldwin's already sort of bouncing around doing other films while this investigation is underway, that pressure on prosecutors could translate to pressure on Baldwin. Fox News also found a third PR expert, a guy called Howard Brewer, and he felt that Baldwin is doing the right thing. And so what he said was, quote, regardless of whether Baldwin is ever found liable in a trial, he is right to return to work and continue to earn a living. Among other things, it's good therapy for him, and this was probably recommended by everyone from his attorneys to his therapists. I don't think this will backfire on him, end quote. I tend to disagree to some extent with what he's saying for a couple of reasons. He may have a right to return to work. I think that's different to saying he is right to return to work. You know, he was saying in that ABC News interview that he will do everything possible to undo what has happened. He wishes he could, but also that he will cooperate with the investigation. Well, one way of cooperating is sticking around, is making yourself available, is not kind of going halfway around the world and doing something else. So he may have the right to return to work, but I don't know if he is right. The other aspect to consider is he doesn't need to earn a living. He's a multimillionaire. He's worth $60 million. He really doesn't need to earn a living. So it seems to be he is making a decision to do what he's doing. It's something that he seems to want to do. It's not that he doesn't have a choice. It's something that he's kind of volunteering to do. I'm also not so sure his attorneys or his therapists would have recommended this. It could be that they're saying, you know what, if you appear not guilty, if you're not guilty, then there's no reason you wouldn't hide away. So if you kept a low profile and you didn't work and you sort of stayed indoors, that could look guilty. Whereas if you acted as though you weren't guilty, what would you do? Well, you'd go and make another movie. And so, as I said, I have an idea. It's simply what Baldwin wants to do. After all, he also said this in that interview on ABC.
And this movie made me love making movies again. I really thought we were onto something.
This movie made me love making movies again. But are movie audiences still going to love Baldwin? Are they going to forgive him? Have they forgiven him? Brewer does make a salient point that if Hollywood felt Baldwin was in the wrong, if Hollywood felt the incident was anything but accidental, Baldwin wouldn't have, quote-unquote, fresh gigs waiting for him post-Rust. I sort of see it in a different way. If the investigative report finds Baldwin culpable, so if in the next few days or weeks or months from now, if the investigative report finds Baldwin has done something wrong, is culpable in some way, then you can see Baldwin finding himself in a pickle. And not only that, Hollywood have to answer to an indignant public. So if the investigative report finds Baldwin culpable in the future, then Hollywood will sort of have to say, oh, okay, maybe it's not a good idea to cast you for the time being. Let's just sort of allow you to lay low for a while, right? So if after the report comes out and Hollywood then cast him, there could be this question, quote, why is the disgraced actor being cast in X and Y, end quote. That could be a hypothetical question. As I've said before, I think it's too soon to call Baldwin, quote, the disgraced actor, unquote, before the findings actually come out. And perhaps he's playing that legal limbo to his advantage, making hay while the sun shines. So in other words, it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. So he's making a movie now, and even if that comes out and he is found culpable, it's still a movie that can come out and people might think, you know what, I would like to watch Alec Baldwin in this film. I feel maybe he did something wrong, but I'm going to kind of give him the benefit of the doubt. That's totally different to he's not being allowed to make films and then he kind of gets forgotten and sidelined. Does that make sense? Brewer also differentiates Baldwin from other quote-unquote bad actors. He says the following, quote, as tragic as the Rust shooting was, the public generally doesn't have the same type of disapproval or contempt for Baldwin as it had for Mel Gibson, Kevin Spacey, or Harvey Weinstein. The court of public opinion acknowledges that he is in the middle of a very bad situation, but that's not the same thing as seeing Baldwin as a bad person. And that distinction makes all the difference in this context, end quote. And that's also something I think that he said to Fox News, this crisis expert. Brewer could be right. On the other hand, if it turns out that the Colchon said was largely Baldwin's doing, and things were a lot worse than we know. If there was a lot of plinking going on and a lot of recklessness, if safety ought to have been, for example, his responsibility as the person actually holding the weapon, you could have an even worse situation. Bear in mind, in the case of Mel Gibson, Kevin Spacey, and Harvey Weinstein, nobody died. Whatever their sins, nobody lost their lives in any of those debacles. You might minimize it and say it was just a question of harsh words in one particular actor's case. It was some kind of conduct in another, but nobody died. And here somebody did die. So, although Brewer seems to think there isn't much opprobrium for Baldwin, and Baldwin himself seems to be saying that, I'm seeing quite a lot based on my research and reading a lot of comments on social media. Baldwin didn't do himself any favors, in my opinion, going onto ABC News and telling a not terribly convincing story. If he did that to curry favor or gain sympathy, I'm not sure that it worked. Meanwhile, we await the results of the ongoing investigation. That may provide the best guidance on Baldwin's approval rating with the public, as well as his fate in the legal sense. I'm not going to take it further than that. I do want to let you guys know I've just put up the third episode in the Debunking Van Gogh series. We're looking at the narrative of a really credible art expert on Van Gogh's last days, and we're looking at it from a true crime perspective. Does what is said and believed about Van Gogh make sense in terms of how he died, given the facts? And so if you're interested in Van Gogh, you're interested in something different in terms of true crime, check that out. The next episode on Van Gogh will be next Wednesday, and every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.